This is from Rutgers University. Their English department has taken bold strides to de-emphasize traditional grammar, and this because they want to show solidarity with Black Lives Matter. So here's how it's being reported here at the College Fix. TheCollegeFix.com is the website. The English department at Rutgers University recently announced a list of anti-racist directives and initiatives for the upcoming fall and spring semesters, including an effort to de-emphasize traditional grammar rules, like, with English, the way you should speak it. The initiatives were spelled out by Rebecca Walkowitz, the English department chair at Rutgers, and it was sent to faculty, staff, and students in an email, copy of which we have. Walkowitz sent in the email on Juneteenth, celebrating the commemoration of the emancipation from slavery in the United States. That's actually not what it's commemorating. It's commemorating the final group of former slaves who found out about their freedom well after the fact of the Emancipation Proclamation. But in any case, we won't dispute that. The title of the email is Department Actions in Solidarity with Black Lives Matter. The email states that the ongoing and future initiatives that the English department has planned are a way to contribute to the eradication of systemic inequities facing Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That's a quote from the email. One of the initiatives is described as incorporating critical grammar, now that's in quotation marks, into our pedagogy. You may say, what does that mean? Well, it is listed as one of the efforts for Rutgers graduate writing program, which serves, this is a quote from the letter, serves graduate students across the Rutgers community. The GWP's mission is to support graduate students of all disciplines in their current and future writing goals, from coursework papers to scholarly articles and dissertations. Under a so-called critical grammar pedagogy, quote, this approach challenges the familiar dogma that, you notice the loaded language that they're using here, the familiar dogma that writing instruction should limit emphasis on grammar sentence level issues so as not to put students from multilingual, non-standard academic English backgrounds at a disadvantage. Instead, it encourages students to develop a critical awareness of the variety of choices available to them with regard to micro-level issues in order to empower them and equip them to push against biases based on written accents. Walkowitz comments came amid racial unrest within academia following the death of George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer. She explained in the email that since 2012, the Rutgers English Department has had a committee on bias awareness and prevention. Following the committee's most recent meeting in mid-June, its members agreed that it needs to move from a role emphasizing awareness and prevention towards a role emphasizing cultural change. Several initiatives came out at that meeting. A recommendation endorsed by leaders of all instructional units is to require all fall 2020 instructors in English to attend at least one workshop remotely on how to have an anti-racist classroom. The committee will be also launching a web page to provide access to events, resources, and affiliated groups, while also organizing two teach-ins focused on Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, police brutality, and prison reform. I always thought, this is weird, but where have I been all this time? I always thought that an English department at a university was supposed to teach English. I thought that was the goal. I didn't realize that the English department at any university was in charge of things like decolonization, getting into police brutality issues, prison reform issues, anti-racism issues. I never realized the vast breadth of activities that a university English department would be involved in. But I'll summarize this whole thing for you. It's a lengthy article, so I won't read all of it to you. But I will tell you this. This is a way of saying, if you speak English correctly, and you do so because that's how English is spoken correctly, then you're probably a racist, or you're probably okay with racism if you don't use slang and things like that. Or if you do use slang, but you sit down to write your term paper and you put aside the slang and you just write normal sentences with correct grammar, that's racist. And you need to stop doing that, because if you just write normal English, if you speak English correctly, you are now suspect as potentially racist, or at least your silence is complicit in racism. That's what they're saying here. Now, I don't think that when it comes time to publishing scholarly articles, could you imagine in the New England Journal of Medicine or in some other prestigious peer-reviewed journal in whatever discipline, can you imagine if one of the graduates that are cranked out from this English program at Rutgers University submits an article for publication, for peer review publication, using incorrect grammar? Do you think they will get very far? I don't. Hopefully, this kind of nonsense is not going to spread, but all kinds of other nonsense has been spreading, so we'll see what happens. But in the event that you are considering Rutgers, maybe you were considering an English degree, read this article and think carefully where you want to spend your money. Edwina, listening in Washington, D.C., welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you, Patrick. I'd like to comment on your last segment there on the Rutgers English Department.
Yes.
I've been an English teacher for over 35 years. I got my PhD from the University of Maryland in the year 2000 in English language and literature. It took me a while to get that degree because I was working at the same time that I got it. So
Congratulations. That's a real achievement.
Thank you. Thank you. I was in academia for quite a long while. Went back to school after my undergrad degree, which was also in English. And what I saw was the infiltration of English departments by Marxist ideology from, let's say, the late 70s, right after the Cultural Revolution of 68 that swept Western Europe and the United States. And since then, if you look at it, if you've been in that environment, you've seen a progressive Marxism take over all of the thinking in English departments. So I'm not surprised at what I see, but I think I'm very glad that you're warning your listeners about this fact so that they can make informed choices about where they send their children to school, because it is a threat. It is the kind of brainwashing that went on in the Soviet Union after the communist takeover when textbooks were rewritten. They've been rewritten in this country already. Right. They can be sure that there'll be more of an effort to do that. Thinking is changed by what we read, how we speak, etc., and that's definitely ongoing. So I just say what we're witnessing is a page from the Marxist playbook for the takeover of the nation.
I believe you. I do. By the way, I just want to say your English is excellent, Edwina. Your accent is
Thank
flawless.
you. I guess I learned something in school.
Your accent is flawless.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, and thank you for validating this point. I'm in academia insofar as I teach, but I'm not, like entrenched in an English department or anything. So when I see stories like this, it boggles my mind. But I'm glad that you're giving validation that this is really happening everywhere, isn't it?
Right. Yes. And if you look at, for example, what has happened in linguistics since the 60s, the deconstruction movement, the structuralist movement, etc., all of those were thinking that's infiltrated with Marxist ideas and ideals. So thank you for bringing what you bring up to the fore, and that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you. If you don't mind staying an extra minute or so, may I ask you a couple of questions in your professional capacity? One is,
sure.
I'm sure you're aware of the widespread movement to purge books like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and other books that are deemed racist. And yet, they don't want those books infecting the minds of young people who might read them and start saying the N-word, even though this is historical context of the way people actually spoke at the time that the book was set. But they're, on the other hand, as we saw here with Rutgers, they're encouraging students to use slang, and in street slang especially. This is all very coded, but it suggests to me that they're saying, go ahead and speak like this. But I wonder, would that be considered cultural appropriation if a white student were to use, let's say, African-American slang in a term paper that he handed in for an English class? Do you think he would... I mean, if you had to guess, I know you don't know for sure, but what do you think their attitude would be by way of cultural appropriation if a white student did that? How does that work?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to both of those points. The first one is purging Huck Finn from the canon. I mean, there is no canon anymore of literature, so that's gone, which means we don't read or get to engage with, whether we agree with them or not, ideas that have been raised and seem valuable throughout the centuries, throughout all of human history. That's one thing. But if you actually read Huck Finn and pay attention to the relationship between, I know your listeners may not have, but if you read Huck Finn and you pay attention to the relationship between Huck and Jim, what you see is Huck's father is a real white trash loser.
Yep.
He's an alcoholic.
Jim is a great guy.
Support his family. Jim is a great guy. And when Huck says, I always knowed that Jim was white inside, he's simply saying Jim is an upright, noble individual, because all Huck knows of uprightness, of course, is what he's experienced among the largely white population he's engaged with. And he's living in a prejudiced community against African American people. As a matter of fact, they're slaves at that point, right? They're seen as part of the human.
Pre-Civil War.
He engages with Jim, and he discovers that Jim is human, and that's what's being validated in the novel. Mm-hmm. That's my take on it, and I would hope that other people would see it that way. But I guess people don't want to look at that. That's one thing. On the other hand, yes. A white student might be accused of cultural appropriation, but not after what's happened at Rutgers. I mean, I think all kinds of things are going to be permitted, and there might even be, I mean, this is kind of just a suspicion, but there might even be a desire for that to happen, because if you distort the language, or if you can manage a cultural revolution goal like the Chinese did with their destruction of their language when Mao took over, what happens is you have an easier time controlling the minds of people. Because again, they have not read too many works of literature that contain other ways of thinking, other ideas that they could engage with, and either accept or not as their own. And their vocabulary becomes very limited. So what you can do in that kind of a scenario is you can manipulate people's minds, because they no longer have the breadth of thought and the capacity for the breadth of thought, the broad vocabulary and a broad range of interests and knowledge of the world, which you get through history. That's another department that's been captured to some extent, in many cases, by Marxism. When you have captured the humanities in general, certainly English, the language and expression and thinking mode of people, you really can manipulate their minds, and you can then do whatever you want with the culture.
Wow. You said it as well as it could be said. Thank you, Edwina. Boy, I want you for the next Secretary of Education, honestly. And at the very least, I'm hoping and praying that you are teaching in a position of authority somewhere. God bless your students. Thank you. I'll be right back with more right after this. I have another little story that ties in with what we talked about a few minutes ago. This also from the College Fix. We talked about how Rutgers English Department, Rutgers University English Department, has issued some edicts now about how they want to make sure that students in their program are not confined to correct grammar and such. They want them to feel free. In fact, they're encouraging them to use bad grammar, etc. And you heard a wonderful, brilliant exposition of this by that lady who called in, Edwina, I believe it was, who has a PhD in English, and she verified that this kind of thing is going on. Well, this is related to this. This is from last fall. In Muncie, Indiana, Ball State University, they hosted a presentation to, quote, engage with the question of how English language practices in college classrooms contributes to white supremacy. The title of this lecture was Freeing Our Minds and Innovating Our Pedagogy from White Language Supremacy. This is in the English department, and it also had to do with other departments in the school, but it was said there, we are all implicated in white supremacy. And this by Asao Inoue, who's a professor and the assistant dean of the College of Integrative Sciences and Arts at Arizona State University. He was invited to speak there. He says, we are all implicated in white supremacy. This is because white supremacist systems, like all systems, reproduce themselves as a matter of course. This includes reproduction of dominant, white, middle-class, monolingual standards for literacy and communication. By the way, as I read through this, take note that he is engaging in this himself. He's engaging in the very thing that he is opposed to. And what is that? He's using correct English. He's using correct English. He's conjugating his verbs correctly. His nouns and adjectives agree in number. He's doing the very thing that he says you shouldn't do. White language supremacy, according to Inoue, is, quote, the condition in classrooms, schools, and society where rewards are given in determined ways to people who can most easily reach them because those people have more access to the preferred and embodied white language practices. And part of that access is a structural assumption that what is reachable at a given moment for the normative white monolingual English user is reachable for all. He's speaking as a normative white monolingual English user, isn't he? What if he were to have given this speech, the 75-minute lecture, all in slang and didn't use correct English? Do you think anyone would have taken him seriously? So in essence, he's sort of proving my point here, that the only way for him to be taken seriously and for people to actually even understand the ideas he's trying to convey is he has to resort to normative white monolingual English in order for people to understand what he's trying to say. But he's saying it that way to say that if you say it that way, you're actually a racist. Do you see how this works? It's important that you understand how this works because sooner or later you may be victimized by this ridiculous thinking. He said, your school can be racist and produce racist outcomes, even with expressed values and commitments to anti-racism and social justice. In one of his slides, Inoue stated that grading is a great way to protect the white property of literacy in schools and maintain the white supremacist status quo without ever being white supremacist or mentioning race. So just giving grades to say you get an A or a B or a C, that in itself is racist, and that in itself, in his mind anyway, means you're protecting the white property of literacy, whatever that's supposed to mean. Inoue is known for advocating that students should be graded based on the labor they put into their work, not the quality of the finished product. He said in his book, Anti-Racist Writing Assessments, this is exhausting. Dealing with these people is exhausting. His book is called Anti-Racist Writing Assessment Ecologies, Teaching and Assessing Writing for a Socially Just Future. This is exhausting. I feel like I'm jogging through quicksand here. But in this book, he said, we must rethink how we assess writing if we want to address the racism. In another paper, which is titled A Gradeless Writing Course That Focuses on Labor and Assessing, Inoue argued that writing teachers should, quote, calculate course grades by labor completed and dispense almost completely with judgments of quality when producing course grades. So if the student turns in junk, if the student turns in some incomprehensible gibberish, but he really worked hard at it, he should get an A. And if the smart kid, whoever he may be, Asian, black, Hispanic, white, whatever, if that kid turns in a flawless paper using English correctly, and maybe didn't have to work that hard at it because, she's always reading and studying and really engaged. If it didn't really cost her much by way of labor and the paper was flawless, well, she shouldn't get a good grade because she didn't have to work for it as hard. And so on and so forth. This is just another example of what I'm referring to. And I'm really glad that the lady that I spoke to on the phone, what is her name? Edwina, I'm glad that she brought this up when it comes to parents choosing a good school for your kids. Don't settle for this nonsense. And while I'm at it, I just want to cast my mind back 50 plus years ago. There was a song that was being taught to kids when I was a kid. So this is going back now, 55 years, something like that. It was called Sons of God. And I won't sing it to you because your ears will bleed. Trust me on this one. But here are the words. Sons of God, hear his holy word. Gather around the table of the Lord. Eat his body, drink his blood, and we'll sing a song of love. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. My mind is melting even just at the memory of this horrid song. Here's why I'm mentioning this song to you. You know why? Because this is a song you never hear. You never will hear this song in the typical parish. You won't find it. I haven't looked, but I'm pretty sure you won't find it in the Gather hymnal. You won't find it in the hymnals produced by, Oregon Press, whatever they are. You know why? Do you know why you won't find this song anymore? Because it uses exclusive language. Look at all the male pronouns. First of all, sons of God, not children of God, not persons of God, just sons of God. Hear his holy word. Eat his body, drink his blood. So that song, although it was catching on like wildfire when it was first being inflicted upon us kids back in the mid to late 60s, it disappeared under the weight of the cultural norms that said that this is just far too much male imagery there, far too much. And to say sons of God, that is outrageous because it leaves women out. That's just one example. Now, there are other songs. Remember the song, I think it's called, what is it called? I Am the Bread of Life? And the refrain goes, nowadays the refrain goes, and I will raise you up on the last day, and I will raise you up on, you know that song? That's not the original wording of that song. The original wording was, and I will raise him up, which is preferable. The reason it was preferable is because the whole context is God speaking about this. So now, the way this was rewritten, also again because of the sensitivities about inclusive language, they just couldn't stand the fact that it's saying, I will raise him up, because that excludes women. And of course, now that excludes the 54 other gender options that Facebook allows. But there's no way to say, and I will raise Two-Spirit up, and I will raise, trans man asterisk up. You can't fit all those possibilities in there. So they rewrote it to say that you're saying in your own voice, as in other words, you're speaking in the voice of God, and I will raise you up, because then it's neutral. And if you were to go through and look at some of these very popular hymns,
I'm doing a quick YouTube search. I can't even find one with
you can't
him. I can't. Everything is you.
It's erased. It's erased, and I saw it happen. Oh, and this is only by virtue of my being as old as I am. I saw it happen. I remember all these songs when they first came out. And it didn't take long before the people who do such things got their hands on them, and they changed them all. So just FYI, that's all.
For more of The Patrick Madrid Show, visit relevantradio.com/Patrick.